happens to be someone who was convicted of it. I was beaten by a police officer when I was 15 years old. Doesn't mean that we think that all police officers are bad, but we got to be honest about the fact that there's a culture in place that says that it's okay to harm poor people, working class people, black and brown people in this country if you happen to have a badge. And that's what happened to George Floyd. That's just the most egregious example that we've seen because it was videotaped for 9 minutes, 29 seconds. But this has been going on for decades upon decades.
And Kevin, that goes to this question of what is compliance, what is non-compliance, and what are the police empowered to do when they encounter what they regard as non-compliance? True?
Well, if we look at the videotape of George Floyd, how could he not be complying when he was face down on the ground, handcuffed behind his back, screaming for his mother as he was dying? And so, there's a whole range of things that we need to talk about, which is how do we police our communities in the first place? Why is violence a solution for everything? Are police officers equipped to deal with things like domestic violence, domestic disputes, mental health issues? And I respectfully say that should not be the job of a police officer. And we see a lot of the cases that have happened. We've even seen disabled people killed or shot by the police because they didn't know how to relate to that particular part of the community. So it's not just about compliance, non-compliance. It's like, how are police officers trained and what are they actually prepared to deal with and what are they not prepared to deal with? That's the real question to me.
Right, and I brought that up, Kevin, not to be a mouthpiece for the Minneapolis Police Department, but to remember that it was brought up in the trial that was a justification for what Derek Chauvin did, that he was non-compliant. And the jury listened to that and rejected that. In the tortured arc of American justice, how important do you think that is or isn't?
I tell you, of course they're going to bring it up. They're going to bring up a whole bunch of things. I watched, paid attention very closely to the trial. The man was face down, handcuffs behind his back. There was no issue of compliance or non-compliance. There was nothing he could do. There was nothing. This was, in my opinion, a willful act. You see Derek Chauvin's face, he's unemotional as this man is screaming for his mother, and he literally took the man's life by kneeing him to death. And the hope is of myself and other folks who are leaders, activists around the country, is that this gentleman will get the maximum penalty today because it sends a message not just to Derek Chauvin, but to police officers and anyone who does this, any kind of racial murder, that this is unacceptable, that our lives are valuable, and we need to stop killing people just because of who they are, because we think that they did something that is so egregious that they deserve to have their lives taken. That's unacceptable. That's inhumane. That's not who we should be as American people.
Kevin, I want to bring into the conversation Lorenzo Boyd. He is the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of New Haven. Lorenzo, as someone who works with the police department, what impact, if any, do you see the Chauvin case having had or having in the future?
I think the guilty verdict on all counts was the best possible outcome for policing because it shows good police officers that they can distance themselves from the stuff that happened with Chauvin. And there's no excusing what happened. So we're hoping that the verdict is also going to give a sentence that actually sends a message to all bad cops that are out there.
And Lorenzo, do you think, based on your interactions with police departments, there is a different conversation about tactics, about terminology, what is compliance, what is non-compliance? How do you de-escalate situations? How do you find ways to mediate situations that are less aggressive than the kind of tactics that either Derek Chauvin used or other officers have used that have had deadly consequences with their own service firearms?
Well, two things I want to mention to you, Major. Yes, it absolutely changed the conversation. And I think the Derek Chauvin video worked its way into every training of every police department, or at least every progressive department around the country. But more importantly, it talks about what happens prior to the fact that people get together. What happens before the initial contact. It talks a lot about building relationships in the community. It talks about how do we avoid getting to this point.
Let me jump in, Lorenzo, because I need to get to the courtroom because Peter Cahill is there. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. And Kevin, the judge is now opening the proceeding.
And for the defense. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Eric Nelson and Amy Box appearing on behalf of Mr. Chauvin.
Thank you. We are still, for all those attending, under somewhat modified COVID restrictions, so we are asking that everyone keep their masks on unless they are speaking. I'll ask for people who are speaking to come up to the lectern and use the microphones, and please remove your mask so that we can hear you clearly, and also to maintain the distances that we have set out in the courtroom. With that, we'll proceed first with the state. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed with victim input.
Your Honor, we have 4 victim impact statements. We will start with the 7-year-old daughter of George Floyd, Gianna Floyd, who will present hers by video.
What do you miss most about your daddy?
This side right here.
About him all the time, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about him, what are you asking about?
Well, I was asking, how did my dad get hurt?
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
Yes. And when you see your daddy again one day, what do you want to do when you see him?
I want to play with him.
What kind of games do you want to play with him?
I want to play with him, have fun, go on a plane ride,
This child ain't gonna never be able to see
it.
his father
Yeah. Would
We
you,
till
used
God
to-
called
we
her.
used to have dinner meals every single night before we went to bed. My daddy always used to help me brush my teeth.
oh. Do you miss him helping brush your teeth?
Yes.
How do you hope that the world remembers him?
Well, they helped him because those mean people did something to him.
Yeah. If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
All right. Thank you, Gianna. I really appreciate you answering questions today.
That was Gianna Floyd. Gianna, next we'll hear from the nephew of George Floyd, Brandon Williams. This way.
Your names.
Brandon Williams, BRANDON WILLIAMS.
You may proceed.
On Monday, May 25th, 2020, George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered by Derek Chauvin in a malicious and insidious display of hate and abuse of power. Chauvin killed George. Not only did he kill George, but he also displayed a total lack of consideration for human life as he did so. You saw it, I saw it, and millions of people across the country and the globe witnessed the act of hate. A year and 1 month later, I stand there before you tasked with the duty of expressing how George's death has impacted me personally and the rest of our family. As I racked my brain and thought about what I could say today, I came to this conclusion. It is humanly impossible for me to stand here and convey or articulate the right words that would capture all that we are feeling and what we have felt over this period. So please bear with me as I attempt the impossible. The sudden murder of George has forever traumatized us. You may see us cry, but the full extent of our pain and trauma will never be seen with the naked eye. The heartbreak and hurt goes far beyond any number of tears we could ever cry. Words simply cannot express the pain, anguish, and suffering that our family and friends have endured since George's murder. It has been truly unimaginable. But not as nearly unimaginable as the defendant's decision to take the life of a human being with no regard for the effect it may have on others. Although Chauvin will be sentenced today and spend time in prison, he will have the luxury of seeing his family again, talking to them, and he will likely get to spend time with them upon his release. These are all luxuries that my young cousin Gianna was robbed of when Chauvin made the active decision to kill our father. There will be no more birthday parties, no graduations, holiday gatherings, or other family celebrations. The laughter, hugs, guidance, advice, sense of security, and those opportunities to simply say I love you are forever gone. They say time heals all, and while I generally believe that saying, it's challenging to do so given these unfathomable set of circumstances. Before I conclude, I must highlight a few things. George's murder, this trial, and everything in between has been tragic and devastating. Our family is forever broken, and one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd. It is the request of my family that the maximum penalty for the crime for which the defendant was convicted be imposed. On behalf of my family, friends, community, and supporters, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for allowing us opportunities of expression. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, just for the record, this wonderful lady standing here is a Hennepin County victim advocate.
Bondwell is well known to the court.
Yes, thank you, Judge.
And so, Your Honor, we'll next hear from the brother of George Floyd, Mr. Terrence Floyd.
Yeah, Mr. Floyd, if you could state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Yes. Terrence Floyd. That's Terrence, Floyd, Floyd.
Go ahead.
I'm here representing my brother. I'm from New York. On May 25th, 2020, my brother was murdered. Everyone knows, by Derek Chauvin. The facts of this case were proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and 3 guilty verdicts have been rendered. The situation has really affected me and my family. Any family member that has went through this, we are part of a fraternity of families, and it's not one of those, fraternities that you enjoy. Over this last year and months, I actually talked to a few people, and I wanted to know from the man himself why. What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Why when you knew that he posed no threat anymore, he was handcuffed, why you didn't at least get up? Why you stayed there? A month before my brother was murdered, I was on the phone with him, and we had a long conversation. And as I looked at the video of my niece, the last conversation me and my brother had was he wanted to have play dates. He wanted to plan play dates with Gianna and my daughter, and we started setting it up. That can't happen. And I have to, my daughter's still young, but I still have to explain to her, because this is history. This is a case everybody knows about. So she's gonna find out, and I'm gonna have to explain that to her. And I think that's
to me, harder than even just standing here. That I have to talk to my daughter and tell her, about her niece, about her uncle, about the situation. That's basically reliving it all over again, years down the line. I'm here on behalf of my family, on behalf of me and my family, we seek the maximum penalty. We don't want to see no more slaps on the wrist. We've been through that already. In my community, in my culture, we've been through that already. Smacks on the wrist. No. Because if it was us, the roles was reversed, there wouldn't be no case. It would have been open and shut.
Right.
We'd have been under the jail for murdering somebody. So we asked for that same penalty for Derek Chauvin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, the final victim impact statement for the state will come from George Floyd's brother, Floyd.
And sir, if you could begin by giving us your full name and spell each of your names, and I have permitted you to use your phone because you have notes on it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you may proceed when you're ready. Giving us your full name first.
Floyd, spelled Philonise. Last name Floyd, Floyd.
And you may proceed.
Hello, Big Town. Welcome, brother.
1 year ago, May 25th, my brother George was murdered by Derek Chauvin and his co-defendants in broad daylight with a knee to his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I was a trucker, and immediately my life changed forever. I began to speak to the world for George from the United Nations, Africa, Canada, Japan, and so many other countries. Every day, I have begged for justice to be served, reliving the execution of George, while others begged and pleaded for Officer Chauvin to simply just allow George to take a breath. I haven't had a real night's sleep because of the nightmares I constantly have hearing my brother beg and plead for his life over and over again. Even saying, they're going to kill me. Please, officer. Screaming for our mom. I have had to sit through each day of Officer Derek Chauvin's trial and watch the video of George dying for hours over and over again. For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death every hour of the day, only taking naps and not knowing what a good night's sleep is anymore. I've been lifting my voice tirelessly every day so that George's death will not be in vain. Honorable Judge Peter K. Hill, I thank you for allowing me to share this today. George's life mattered. So my family and I, most of all, my niece, Gianna. My niece, Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, charge that he has been found guilty for. My family and I have been given a life sentence. We would never be able to get George back. Daddy's our daughter's first love. He would never be able to walk Gianna down the aisle at her wedding, attend those magical moments of her life like a daddy-daughter dance, sweet 16 party, seeing her out for prom graduations, and she would never be able to have any personal memories with her father. With a smirk on his face and children present, Officer Chauvin used excessive force and acted against his training. Chauvin had no regards for human life, George's life. I stand before you today asking you to please help us find closure by giving Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, making sure he does his time consecutively without the possibilities
Thanks
of
for coming
parole,
in, Tim.
probation, or getting out early for good behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Here today, of course, for sentencing.
Hello, Nicholas
gives us
White.
an opportunity to
Welcome.
speak about,
Thank you for coming back.
other matters that I think are involved in sentencing.
Please,
and where we are
as
in
you
the criminal
come in,
justice system.
please hit the like button.
The
I
processing
really
of this
do
case.
appreciate it.
As a member of an elected office representing the people of the state of Minnesota, as well as people of the local community, I want to say a couple of things. And first of all, I want to really thank some of the police officers at the Minneapolis Police
Again,
Department
this is about George Floyd
under great pressure,
sentencing.
great stress, to some extent at peril to their occupations, what they've devoted their life to, stuck to their oath and their commitment as police officers to speak openly and honestly about policing and the training that is given and received by police officers. Those officers didn't hide behind a blue wall. They came forward. They told this court and those jurors what they knew about training and responsibility. And I think they deserve recognition and credit for that. I would also like to thank members of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. You know, those agents get called in, great sacrifice to their personal lives. Whenever things happen, they go. They did that here, and under really extraordinary circumstances,
George Floyd family is getting
investigation. You know, conducting interviews
justice.
is hard enough, but conducting them in the atmosphere of the city
for what this
following the
officer
murder of
did.
George Floyd was even more difficult. And they did so, I think, above and beyond the call of duty. And I want to thank them for doing that on behalf of the whole prosecution staff. You know, I want to thank the family, the loved ones, the friends of George Floyd. They have been through so much more than families involved in murder cases. He's right. It's a fraternity you don't want to be part of.
If you can you share me out?
Because of the pandemic and because of security, safety precautions that we've had to take, they have been through a lot. At a time when they try to grieve, like everybody does for the loss of someone, they are going through so much more. And I want to thank them, all of them, the family. The court saw a testimony from Florence Floyd, Courtney Ross. These are people who are trying to deal with their loss, but they have to do it in a very public way and under very trying circumstances through no fault of their own. So I thank them. They have all been models of grace and understanding. And it's really remarkable, quite frankly. I'll, I think, come back to them again in a little bit. Your Honor, we have submitted a sentencing brief. I would incorporate that. I guess I would incorporate my comments to the end of that memo. But I do think there are things that I want to bring out today in my arguments. For hundreds of years, the court had discretion in sentencing. It was the trial court's decision on what a sentence should be. The recognition that the trial court sat through the trial, watched the evidence, saw how it affected people, informed the court's discretion. And the legislature passed the guidelines in a legitimate attempt to try and even out sentences.
The police
they
officer
certain presumptive sentences, as we all know,
is learning
for
his
typical crimes.
For
each crime, the typical
freedom.
crime. But they did not remove discretion for sentencing judges. They recognized that nobody is better suited to decide whether this is the typical case represented by that guidelines presumptive sentence, or if there are reasons why this is worse than that. And the guideline still gives this court discretion when there are aggravating factors to give a more serious sentence than what the guidelines presumption calls for. And as you know, we are asking you to do that today. As this court found, there are 4 aggravating factors that we have identified. They go beyond a list of just what those factors are. We have not just done our homework and found a list. The court made good findings, detailed findings about those factors, and we think they justify a greatly increased sentence. This is not the typical second-degree unintentional murder. Supreme Court in our state has said that, and very recently, even one aggravating factor is sufficient to go twice the top of the range. Here we have 4. The first one that the court found is an abusive position of trust and authority. And the court specifically found that when Mr. Chauvin was acting as a police officer, he had a position of trust and authority. That is certainly true. We trust police officers. We trust them when we need help. We call them for help. We trust that they're going to take care of the problems that they are assigned to deal with, right? We trust them. We also give them great authority. We give them great power. We give them power to use force that individuals would be prosecuted for using, right? We give them authority to arrest, to detain. And with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. So they're not sent out there by themselves to do this. They're given substantial training. This court saw all of that through the trial, in general and in specific to Mr. Chauvin and the other 3 officers. They're given training on the use of force, the proportional use of force. The force used has to be warranted by the threat. They're given training on de-escalation because we recognize
you think you're gonna
get
by with everything,
in when people are not
but God,
when people might be affected by mental illness.
God gonna hold you accountable for everything that you have done.
A bad day, and they're trained for that, and should be. And they're taught how to use that to de-escalate and control a situation. They're taught medical intervention. They're taught to provide medical attention to people who need it. Being a police officer is a difficult job. We ask a lot of them. It's a profession, there's no doubt about it. But we give them a substantial amount of training, and most officers do it right. This case wasn't about police officers, all police officers. It wasn't about policing. This case was about Derek Chauvin disregarding all that training he received and assaulting Mr. Floyd until he suffocated to death. One of the things that you heard, Your Honor, and the jurors heard that can really encapsulate, I think, a very important issue here. 7 words: in your custody, it's in your care. And it's a real simple mantra. It's a real easy thing to remember. You're going to take custody of somebody, you have to provide care. You have to do it in a caring way. You can't simply disregard their care. Mr. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority as a police officer by doing just that, just disregarding all his training. It was an abuse of that because what did he decide to do? We often are forced in this, criminal justice system to infer people's state of mind by their conduct and their statements. What was Derek Chauvin's end game here? What was the plan? It seems apparent the plan was hold him down until we can dump him in an ambulance and no longer have him be our problem. You recall he said to Charles McMillan, "It's a big guy, might be on something." That's it. He held Mr. Floyd down as Mr. Floyd begged for his life. He had the other officers help in that regard. And rather than doing the simple expedient of putting him on his side, he said, He was dismissive to that duty of care. We trust that arrestees will be treated with respect, reasonable force, and that their medical needs will be addressed. I'm paraphrasing from the court's findings. That trust was violated. We trust that they will use their authority reasonably. And this was a particularly egregious abuse of that force. Again, paraphrasing the court's findings. The typical second-degree murder does not involve that extent of abuse of a dearly held position of abuse, or a position of authority and trust by the community, by individuals of the community. Your Honor found that Mr. Floyd was treated by Mr. Chauvin with particular cruelty. I think tortured is the right word. We know that, we've all seen it. Mr. Floyd did not want to be in the back seat. That's it. That's the rub. It was the need to get him in that back seat no matter what. And we all saw that once he was pulled out of that back seat, he calmed right down, even willingly went down to the ground. "I'm going down," he said. And he went down to the ground, not fighting, not punching, and he was placed initially on his side. He's already handcuffed. He's placed on his side in the recovery position, like he should be, because he's trying to breathe, and then quickly placed prone on the ground, face down. Mr. Chauvin put his left knee on George Floyd's neck, his right knee on George Floyd's back, face down on the pavement. Had Officer King sit on Mr. Floyd's waist area, and had Officer Lane hold his feet down. You can even see Mr. Floyd trying to pull his feet up. We all are going to fight to breathe. Everybody knows that fear when you all of a sudden realize you're having trouble breathing. It's just innate, right? We want to survive. We know we have to breathe. And there's an automatic reaction when you begin to feel like that is threatened. And you can see Mr. Floyd going through that. He tries to pull his feet up. But he's held down by these three officers while Officer Tao is looking on. Later, of course, goes to keep the people who want to help away. He's placed face down on this pavement so harshly that it rubs the skin off his face. He has injuries to his face from being face down on the pavement. He has injuries to his knuckles from just trying to lift himself up. And he's telling Officer Chauvin, "I can't breathe. I'm dying." And Mr. Chauvin's response was, And all this time, imagine what Mr. Floyd is going through. If we're going to talk about particular cruelty and torture, really try to appreciate what he's going through. He knows he's suffocating. They don't know that feeling of not being able to breathe enough. And he's begging, he's pleading, and he's being ignored. His concerns are being dismissed by somebody who has taken custody but not care.
He was kept in that prone position for 9.5 minutes and was suffocated. There's no other way to say it. That's particularly cruel. That is more cruel than a typical second-degree unintentional murder. Significantly more. This is not a momentary gunshot, punch to the face. This is 9.5 minutes of cruelty to a man who was helpless and just begging for his life. This court found that there were children present, standing only a few feet from these officers. These children, who were ages 17 and one child age 9. Why is that an aggravating factor? Well, I think everybody can figure that out. Right? It's particularly bad to commit a crime in front of children. We've heard a lot of academia about the development of the young brain and how long it can take. And here you got a couple of teenage girls and a 9-year-old girl. How are they going to process this? Standing feet from a man being suffocated by police officers. Such a stark sight that one of the children even says, we got to call the police on the police. How do you process that as a 9-year-old? The children were not only present watching a man die. We've all seen, if you haven't, you really need to. Look at George Floyd's face. As he's dying, he's suffering. The children have to watch this. But not only that, police officers, and there are people around them wanting to help. And at one point, and sure, they got upset. And at one point, Mr. Chauvin points his mace, grabs his mace to keep him back. How does a child look at that? There's another officer screaming at them to get back. The typical second-degree unintentional murder doesn't involve children standing feet away watching a 9.5-minute suffocation of a man begging for his life.
Don't nobody deserve to get their life taken.
This court also made a finding that the defendant committed the offense with the involvement of 3 or more other persons. Lane and King were involved directly in the restraint, and that Tao kept the bystanders at bay. I've already talked a little bit about Lane and King's role in holding Mr. Floyd down. They recognized that he was pulseless, that Mr. Floyd was pulseless at one point, and yet really made no effort to take care of the person
This
in their
video
custody.
in Minneapolis.
Officer Tao watched most of the suffocation and then only went over to keep people from getting help. One person who is identified as a medical trained firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, and that was dismissed. Like, are we going to believe her? So they kept trained medical people from providing help. These were all uniformed peace officers, adding to that abuse of trust and authority. I know the defense has asked the court for probation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing that. It's so outside of the realm of, I think, real possibility. This is a murder. I understand some of the arguments made on behalf of Mr. Chauvin. I understand, well, no, I can't understand what his family members and friends are going through. I can't. But it's certainly not enough for a departure to probation for a second-degree murder. We believe, Your Honor, that these 4 aggravating factors and the findings that the court has made certainly justify an upward departure because there are 4 of them, not standing alone, but in a sense, not overlapping, but coming together to show this is not the typical second-degree murder. This is egregious. And this justifies a double upward departure. from the top of the box, which is 180 months, we're asking the court to do a double departure, recognizing all four factors, to 360 months. As I mentioned before, Your Honor, this is sentencing. This is the time for victims, right? This is the time for the loved ones of the victim and the community to have a say. Again, I commend this family. I commend all of the loved ones, the friends, the people that have been involved in this case for tolerating and being gracious. None of this, of course, can bring George Floyd back. That's very true. But this is the time for our criminal justice system to say, we hear you. This is the time for their criminal justice system to say, we recognize that this harm you're going through is real. And while we can't feel what you're feeling, we know we can do what your criminal justice system should do and recognize the severity of this crime and reflect that in the sentence to be given. It's time for this criminal justice system to say, we recognize this is more serious than the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The four reasons the court found reflect that and give this court more than an adequate basis to do that. Your Honor, we asked the court to impose a sentence of 360 months, commitment to the Commissioner of Corrections. As you know, Your Honor, there are no fines in murder cases. And we would ask the court just to reserve the issue of restitution and clarify that with the family and present that to the court for 30 days. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Nelson. I'm sorry. Mr. Blackburn.
Sorry, I just thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the defendant's mother, Carolyn Palenti, would like to address the court.
This the part right here I don't get.
If you could state your full name, spelling each of
I
your
have
names,
no respect for the
and
family.
proceed when you're ready.
Carolyn, Carolyn, Palenti,
She didn't give no condolences to the Floyd family.
I am the mother of Derek Chauvin.
Hear what she got
I am
to say.
here to speak on behalf of my entire family. On November 25th, 2020, not only did Derek's life change forever, but so did mine and my family's.
What you think about their family, the Floyd
Derek
family?
devoted 19 years of his life to the Minneapolis Police Department. It has been difficult for me to hear and read what the media, public, and prosecution team believe Derek to be an aggressive, heartless, and uncaring person.
That's what he was that day.
That is far from the truth. My son's identity has also been reduced to that as a racist. I want this court to know
God know that.
That none of these
but the
things
action
are true,
proves wrong.
and that my son is a good man. Derek always dedicated his life and time to the police department. Even on his days off, he would call in to see if they needed help. Derek is a quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and selfless man. He has a big heart, and he always
Well, he
has
didn't
put
have no
others
big
before
heart
his own.
on that day of May.
The public will
He
never
did not
know
have no heart.
the loving and caring man he is that his family does.
Now, you might be
Even though I've
caring
not
to your
spoken
family because
publicly,
that's your family member.
I've
Or
always
what about
supported
George
him
Floyd
100%
and his
and
family?
always will. Derek has played over and over in his head the events of that day. I've seen the toll it has taken on him. I believe a lengthy sentence will not serve Derek well. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me.
Well.
I will not be able to see Derek, talk to him on the phone, or give him a special hug.
And
plus the fact that when
George Floyd ain't gonna be able to get his family no hug.
His father and I most likely will not be here.
You might keep coming in and going out.
Derek, my happiest moment is when I gave birth to you.
And it was George Floyd's mother. What happened when he gave birth to George Floyd?
I was honored to pin your police badge on you.
He got a daughter.
I remember you whispering to me, don't stay.
Yeah, his daughter ain't going to be able to see him no more unless God called her.
Derek, I want you to
but
know
you'll be able to see him. You can go to the prison house to see him. Or call him to get talked to on the phone.
I have read numerous letters from people around the world that also believe in your innocence.
Not around the world. No.
No matter where you go,
because he ain't innocent.
I will always be there to visit you. I promise you I will stay strong, as we talked about, and I want you to do the same for me. I will do what you told me to do, take care of myself, so I will be here for you when you come home. Remember, there is no stronger bond or love than a mother's love. One final thought I want you to remember. Remember, you are my favorite son.
Your favorite son.
Thank you for your time.
But somebody was. George Floyd was somebody's favorite son. George Floyd was somebody's favorite son, somebody's favorite daddy.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. It is my intent.
And I'm going to turn from here and go a little further to what the judge said.
I do not intend to relitigate the facts of this case, nor spend any substantial time.
Is still within the framework of what Minnesota law allows for him to sentence.
The Guidelines Commission was established for a reason.
The criminal justice system, where we might have different views about how to get to.
Krasner in Philadelphia.
Jody, local time, that's about 2.5, 3 minutes.
Into the Floyd.
Where other families didn't even get ability. The treatment that I thought current, which is why we're saying that we
Give an aggravated sentence, which he did. He got 10 years longer than what is stated in Minnesota sentencing guidelines. When he wanted probation, and
forgiving the strength of this family.
Has a 22-page
volunteered because there was short staffing at the time. I know from Your Honor, it is what is appropriate in this case.
On this particular story, we want to add another voice to our conversation. Jessica Levinson, she's a CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, I want to ask you about something that Eric Nelson said, the defense attorney for Derek Chauvin, at the top of his proceeding. He said, this case lies at the epicenter of a cultural divide. Is that how it looks to you Because it doesn't seem to me, yes, there are those who have taken up Derek Chauvin's cause in this, but it seems to me the preponderance of feeling in this country, not just among prosecutors, police, but the country at large, is this. This is a moment, a shocking, horrific moment, and it's not a divide. It's like a pursuit of justice to, if not redress previous injustice, but at least get it right in this case.
I completely agree with you, and I wish I could say something else because it would make for a more interesting conversation if I said, well, yes, but on the other hand, and when I heard that, I just kind of shook my head and I thought, look, there's only so much that he can argue, and therefore I think he's trying to say there's a schism. We heard Eric Nelson, the defense attorney, later say things like, I've heard from people on both sides, continuing this theme of, I know that a lot of people are pushing you to say that we should do something that's very stringent, but on the other hand, there's a lot of people pushing for something lenient. He said, you know, they're both family men, really trying to, I think, treat this as almost an apples to apples situation. But no, I think you're exactly right that we have achieved as a nation, I think, largely a moment of reckoning about the criminal justice system where we might have different views about how to get to a better place. But I think there's one.
So third-degree murder and receive a 12-and-a-half-year sentence. And so I knew
Floyd's crime inflicted. It's time to act. We're counting. Knew what should have happened. A sandwich has meat. Been side by side with us.
That police brutality.
Public opinion.
I think most people are thinking that it's going to go a little longer than shorter. There's still a lot of people who think that, you know, history has shown us that we don't do a really good job holding bad cops accountable. So a lot of people are bracing for that. But even when I'm training police officers around the country and talking to them privately, even they're saying that this was really bad and that this should be a pretty long sentence.
This is really bad. And they also say, I wonder if you are hearing, it's an anomaly. It's so outside of bounds. It's not really a part or shouldn't be a part of overall police reform in general. Are you hearing that pushback? And if you are, do you believe that is justified?
I am hearing that. No, I don't think it's justified at all, because all of this plays into what reform is. We're trying to make policing better, and we keep hearing time and time again that there's one or two bad apples. Well, actually, there's a whole lot of bad apples, and we need police reform. We need it from the legislative perspective. We cannot expect policing to fix itself. So we need all sorts of intervention from all sorts of places to let the good police officers continue to be good officers, but hold the bad officers accountable.
Lorenzo, let me pick up on that. When you say we need reforms, if you could.
Was tragic.
Throughout.
Probation and time served on the other. The judge really could land anywhere in that range.
You are. Do you believe that is justified?
I am hearing that. No, I don't think it's justified at all. because all of this plays into what reform is. We're trying to make policing better, and we keep hearing time and time again that there's one or two bad apples. Well, actually, there's a whole lot of bad apples, and we need police reform. We need it from the legislative perspective. We cannot expect policing to fix itself. So we need all sorts of intervention from all sorts of places to let the good police officers continue to be good officers. Hold the bad officers accountable.
Lorenzo, let me pick up on that. When you say we need reforms, if you could, one or two that you think would be essential to this conversation, essential to a new reality in the way police officers interact, de-escalate or deconflict situations that in the past have led to the use of lethal force.
I think the problem is we start at the point where the citizen and the police officer come in contact with each other. We need to go way before that. Instead of reimagining policing, we need to reimagine training. We need to increase levels of empathy and compassion. We need to increase critical thinking skills and communication skills. We need to get police officers out of the car into the community. We need police officers to understand the lived experience of the people that they're policing. That way the police won't seem like an occupying army of outsiders, and they'll seem like they're part of the community. That's where we need to start with policing. We need to overhaul policing, the whole way we do it, the whole way we do training. And I think we can do that, but we need legislative help doing it.
Lorenzo, I'm going to continue this conversation with you because it's an important topic and you have some particularly powerful insights. I've covered legislatures in Washington, the Congress since 1990. I've also paid a lot of attention to state legislatures, and I can hear them saying already, wait a minute, Lorenzo, all the things you described are kind of atmospheric. They're holistic. We write laws with specific language and specific words that are scrutinized for years and years afterwards. How do we come up with legislative language that begins to put into paper and put into action what you've just described?
I think it's about how the laws are written. First of all, to say that using a chokehold is against policy tells me I can still do it, but I'll get a slap on the hand. But saying that using a chokehold is illegal and we will then charge you criminally is a very different thing. The level of accountability that we need starts there. And to borrow the final summation from the OJ trial, who polices the police? We can't allow the police to do that. We need legislative reform at a national level.
On the bench. We are going to pause for a moment in our coverage so we can begin a CBS News special report. This is a CBS News special report. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. The nation's eyes are on a courtroom in Minneapolis as former officer Derek Chauvin is sentenced for murdering George Floyd. He faces a maximum of 40 years. Judge Peter Cahill is about to deliver the sentence. Let us listen in.
That you took the time to stay with this case and to provide me with input. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation and carefully considered all the facts of the case and the law. But my comments are actually going to be very brief because most of it's going to be in writing. I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order. And why am I doing it in writing? To emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. And that is why, as opposed to trying to being profound here on the record, I prefer that you read the legal analysis that explains how I determined the sentence in this case. What the case is, or what the sentence is not based on, is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. You have our sympathies. And I acknowledge and hear the pain that you are feeling. I acknowledge the pain not only of those in this courtroom, but the Floyd family who are outside this courtroom and other members of the community It has been painful throughout Hennepin County, throughout the state of Minnesota, and even the country. But most importantly, we need to recognize the pain of the Floyd family. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever because it's not the appropriate time. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I'm not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Chauvin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 609.04, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You were granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages. You're prohibited from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding it. Anything from the defense? All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Judge Peter Cahill has just announced the sentence of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, 22 and a half years. Jamie Yukas of
Then he
CBS
got
has covered this
200.
court case from the very beginning. She joins us now from Minneapolis. Jamie, set the scene. If there's any reaction out there or what you have your own reaction based on what you heard before this verdict being announced there in Minneapolis.
Well, I think everyone, including the crowd behind me in front of the government center,
22.5 years, 22 and a half years. Now you're going to hear from this other one. His name is Ronnie. Ronnie O'Neal, the third trial. Well, penalty phase.
State of Florida versus Ronnie O'Neal III, case number 18 CF40.
He killed his girlfriend, his disabled daughter, and tried to kill his son.
The jury find as follows as to Ronnie O'Neal III in this case. A, aggravating factors as to count 1, Kenyatta Barron. 1, the first degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that the first degree murder of Kenyatta Barron was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Yes. 2, Ronnie O'Neal III was previously convicted of a capital felony or a felony involving the use of violence to another person. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that Ronnie O'Neal III was previously convicted of a capital felony or a felony involving the use of violence to another person. Yes. B, Aggravating factors as to count 2. Renivia O'Neal. 1. The first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that the first-degree murder of Renivia O'Neal was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Yes. 2. Victim was less than 12 years of age. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that Renivia O'Neal was less than 12 years of age. Yes. 3.
Cause I always
Victim was
spend my money
particularly
and my
vulnerable
food stamps on
due to
y'all.
advanced age or disability,
But that's the
or
thing I
because
get
Ronnie
by
O'Neal
using my
III
utensils though.
stood in a position of familial or custodial authority over the victim. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that Renivia O'Neal was particularly vulnerable
Now buy me some
due
steaks.
to
I got
advanced age or
$95 on my
disability,
card.
or because Ronnie O'Neal III stood in a position of familial or custodial authority over Renivia O'Neal. Yes. 4. Ronnie O'Neal III was previously convicted of a capital felony or a felony involving the use of violence to another person. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the aggravating factor, that Ronnie O'Neal III was previously convicted of a capital felony or a felony involving the use of violence to another person. Yes. Before I go any further, I just want to caution any family or friends of either the victim's family or the defendant before I go any further in this verdict form. No matter what the jury's verdict is, it must be respected. And please, there are not to be any emotional outbursts. Please. If you answer yes to at least one of the aggravating factors listed in Section A or Section B, please proceed to Section C. C, sufficiency of the aggravating factors. 1, reviewing the aggravating factors that we unanimously found to be established beyond a reasonable doubt in Section A, as they apply to Kenyatta Barron. We, the jury, unanimously find the aggravating factors are sufficient to warrant a possible sentence of death. Yes. 2, reviewing the aggravating factors that we unanimously found to be established beyond a reasonable doubt in Section B, as they apply to Renivia O'Neal. We, the jury, unanimously find the aggravating factors are sufficient to warrant a possible sentence of death. Yes. D, mitigating circumstances. 1 or more individual jurors find that 1 or more mitigating circumstances was established by the greater weight of the evidence. Yes. Eligibility for the death penalty for count 1, Kenyatta Barron. We, the jury, unanimously find that the aggravating factors that were proven beyond a reasonable doubt in Section A outweigh the mitigating circumstances established Section D above as to count 1. No. F, eligibility for the death penalty for count 2, Renivia O'Neal. We, the jury, unanimously find that the aggravating factors that were proven beyond a reasonable doubt in Section B outweigh the mitigating circumstances established Section D above as to count 2. No. If your vote to impose death is less than unanimous, the trial court shall impose a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Dated this 25th day of June, 2021, signed by the foreperson. All right, I'm now going to poll the jury. And again, I'm going to do it by initials and juror number, okay? Members of the jury, we're going to ask each of you individually about the verdict that you have just heard. The question pertains to whether the verdict, as read by myself, was correctly stated. Beginning with juror number 1, initials LR. Do you, juror number 1, initials LR, agree that at least one member of the jury voted for a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole? Juror number 4, initials MD. Do you agree that at least one member of the jury voted for a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility